Hello, friends. Welcome to Journal the Body podcast. My name is Abby Fernandini, and I'm excited for this episode today because I'm going to be going over things I have said yes to and things I have said no to so far in pregnancy. I am going to also cover things that I will likely say yes or no to as I go forward with, uh, labor and delivery and then postpartum. But I just want to start out and say, if you're on this journey, I want to mention that, every single pregnancy is so completely and totally different, right? And one thing that works for one person is absolutely not always going to translate. And so I wanted to preface this caveat with these are the things that I personally am doing. I am kind of going about with my own intuition and the things that I've researched, but this does not hold true for necessarily everyone. And you always need to be doing your own research. As a wise man once said, read widely and read wisely. And I think that really covers a lot of my preface of, I will always listen to other people and their 2 cents, especially in the holistic space. But I definitely will go and continue to do my own research after I have learned about X, Y, or Z. So taking that into consideration, as well as taking into consideration your personal medical status and the experts you're working with, they are really great guidance, and never shy away from asking them questions, especially if you found a really supportive group. I personally am working with a midwifery, which has been really exciting. I certainly did not plan to be going back and forth between New York and Florida, like I've mentioned before, for pregnancy. So it has made my care a little bit more complicated, but now I am working with a birth center midwifery. They kind of take a more holistic functional approach, which is amazing, and it's exactly what I wanted to do. So yeah, I'm going to be going over all of that today. Let's start out with the common pregnancy concerns. This is technically stuff that a lot of times your OBGYN will go over right at the beginning, one of your first visits. They'll hand you a packet. I got an OBGYN packet with all of the different visits I needed to do, the do's and the don'ts, the testing, ultrasound schedules, genetic screen schedules. I'm even looking through it right now. The diet, what does your diet look like? What should you avoid? And then frequently asked questions, et cetera, et cetera. And it's extensive. There's a lot to go through, there's a lot to go over. So I'm just going to hit a couple of different, big topics that people love to ask questions about. The first one is, and I think this is hilarious, the first one that I've gotten a lot of questions about personally, because I posted myself eating quite a bit of raw fish, and people freaked out and they were like, what are you doing eating all this raw fish, right? I do actually eat raw fish during pregnancy. And I think when you look outside of just westernized culture to see what other countries are doing for their care, actually, not even, this is another Western culture, but Japan is a great example. And this is the one that I've been referencing the most. Japan's neonatal care includes tons of raw fish. Now, the caveat with this is that it's very, very high quality fish. You're not eating fish that's high in mercury. So you're staying away from things like tuna, like swordfish, and some of those larger fish that tend to take on that mercury load that obviously can get transmitted to the placenta. And we just really want to avoid any of those heavy metal risks going into the placenta and the baby, right? But eating raw fish has been a really crucial part of my diet for all of the healthy oils, right? And all of the healthy, the protein and the fish oil. It's something that is really pushed a lot during pregnancy. And for me, my raw fish craving went through the roof. Now, I'm not eating it always totally raw. I am eating it in a ceviche form, which it comes in a sauce called leche de tigre. And that is a citrus sauce. So it tends to kill a lot of any sort of bacteria, et cetera, that can be on the surface of fish. But if you're getting high quality fish from a local fisherman, for example, our restaurant is, there's a lot of those concerns are mitigated. I'm also eating lots of octopus and cooked fish. Like I do eat good amounts of shrimp. I have even done oysters, although I don't necessarily recommend going for like the mollusks because those tend to be the highest rates of food poisoning. And that's the other big concern with women, especially in your first trimester, is the food poisoning can be a big factor in you personally deciding whether or not you want to, eat fish. And so for me, I decided that raw fish was going to be a staple in my diet, and it has been so far. And honestly, I had a lot of girls from Peru that also reached out to me and were like, I'm so glad that you're posting this. I also ate like ceviche my entire pregnancy and I never felt better. And I think there's something to be said about how cleansing ceviche can be, like a gentle cleanse, and also just like so great for that protein and the fish oil, etc. But it also comes in like that citrus sauce to where it's really, really stimulating for the liver, and it can help us excrete a lot of things and not transmit some of those things to the placenta if we're really, doing our diets correctly. So I really enjoy ceviche so far. Everybody is different. Some people are not going to feel comfortable, and that is totally okay. But looking at other cultures outside of the US, there are lots of places that also factor it in. And Japan is one of those places that takes their prenatal care very seriously. They take their health food safety very seriously. So yeah, I follow along that. Other stuff I said I'm not going to worry about this was like deli meats. They tell you to stay away from like deli meats, soft cheeses, like all this stuff, right? And the risk is like quote unquote foodborne illness, but you're more likely to get foodborne illness from eating fruits and vegetables than you are to get, sick from some of these foods if you don't wash your fruits and vegetables properly, right? So I think that it all needs to be kind of put into perspective when you're looking at a lot of the restrictions. And I think it can really come across as fear mongering in a lot of ways for pregnant women, because you hear a lot of these things from from healthcare providers, and it's not always contextualized. And when you go and do your own research, you start to question a lot of things, and it feels like there's just a lot of fear mongering. They make everything seem really scary. It can be scary because you're carrying your first baby. You don't want to mess up. You want to do everything right. And Rodrigo used to joke with me like about certain things. He'd be like, I'll believe the propaganda for 8 months, whatever. I just want this baby to be healthy. And I was like, I understand that. That's very fair, right? But with that being said, I do think that some of these things are taken a little bit to the extreme, and it's not always necessary. So that is like as far as food goes. Definitely eating lots of protein to mitigate any, gestational diabetes, to mitigate like things like preeclampsia and some of these other issues that you typically tend to see with pregnancy that arise. I am not doing as much hot yoga as I was. I will do a warm yoga class here or there, and it has to be a very slow flow. So that's kind of one of the biggest things. You do not want to overheat. You do not want to heat up your body temperature, because more so than anything, it's for the fetus. The fetus has no way to, off-put that extra heat. And when the fetus temperature raises, it can have pretty drastic impacts on the development. So I do also stay away from the sauna for the most part, but have sprinkled in warm yoga here and there. I'm a little bit more conditioned to the hotter weather because of being in Florida the last, 2 years, year or so, back and forth between Florida and New York. So I feel like I definitely have a different heat tolerance, and I'm able to kind of like self-cool very easily. So that's where I've taken my own kind of gone off of my own intuition and just followed it in that respect, right? I have said no to prenatals. And there is a reason. My good friend and I were just talking about this the other day, Peyton. We were talking about how folic acid is the biggest thing that you see in majority of prenatals, right? But folic acid is the synthetic form of folate, and folate is what you actually need to support methylation. And again, I'm not going to go down this road and like what all of that means, but every OBGYN tends to push this folic acid during pregnancy, but really what you need is folate. You need also you just need a wide range of B vitamins. So I get that from things like beef liver and bee pollen, etc. There are some prenatals on the market that actually do have folate, and they are great options to getting folate, but majority of the prenatals on the market are folic acid. It's a synthetic form. It's not going to help you, especially when you're looking at like genetic mutations such as the MTHFR gene, which again, 40% of the population carries this gene. So, it's like the baby, when it has trouble like latching to nurse, or it has the sugar bug vein, I'm trying to learn a little bit more about that, etc. They're not methylating well. And so that's where these like B vitamins really tend to come in, and especially, folate in particular. So that is my 2 cents on the prenatals. Instead of doing prenatals, like I mentioned before, I'm doing beef liver and a lot of bee pollen, and I have done some like supplements of, B vitamins here and there, not overly, I haven't gotten too crazy with any of that. I was doing a little bit of progesterone cream to support, pregnancy through that 20-week mark when you tend to have a little bit more risk. So once I kind of got more into that second trimester, that risk went down dramatically, and I kind of eased off the progesterone. I'm using topical vitamin E oil over my belly, which has been amazing, not only for stretch marks, but also it's a great way to absorb like low dose vitamin E for the baby. So that's also what I've been doing. I'm trying to think of like some other things. I'm definitely taking a lot of magnesium glycinate. Pregnancy constipation is real, guys. Like especially in your first couple of like weeks to months, when everything in your body just feels like it's rearranging, you're just like, oh my gosh, like I haven't been able to like have a consistent bowel movement. So magnesium glycinate has really come in handy. All of that has kind of sorted itself out as I've progressed during pregnancy. Like second trimester now, I have no problems at all. I'm eating like, a good diet. I've got a really good, handle on what works for me and what doesn't. So that's another thing. And then definitely doing tons of minerals, lots of minerals for the baby, lots of like fresh juices. And when I say juices, I'm not drinking like sugary juices. I'm drinking like tall glasses of cucumber juice. After a meal with protein, I'll have like, carrot juice. I'm doing like grapefruit cucumber juices, stuff that's just like really nourishing, really dense with minerals. And also just really hydrating. That makes a huge difference. And then also topical magnesium. You can get like magnesium sprays. And I've already mentioned that before. So this is probably just a little bit redundant. The other thing that is so, controversial is going to be cod liver oil. I'm going based off of my go-to book, which is the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child. And there's a couple other books I'll mention later that I've really leaned on for my like own personal research. But cod liver oil has been used for generations, for centuries. It is a staple in Europe. When you get sick, cod liver oil. For immunity, cod liver oil. Like it is the cure-all, the band-aid for everything. And I like to preface like cold pressed, unrefined, like all that stuff, right? Your quality of cod liver oil is especially important. I use Rosita's, or I use the Dropy brand, DROPI. There has been a lot of, again, fear-mongering for things like cod liver oil because of what synthetic vitamin A can do to, fetal development during pregnancy, right? So if you actually think about things like Accutane, why they require anybody who's going on Accutane to take multiple forms of birth control, it's because, I don't know, I'm linking it in my brain. It's got to do with like potentially like synthetic vitamin A. I'm not entirely sure, but that is a cause for concern during pregnancy. I'm like gonna fact check myself. Let's let's see here. Synthetic vitamin A and Accutane. Yeah. So that is okay. I was just confirming that was like where I was going with that. So cod liver oil is really high in vitamin A, but it's also high in other things that balance out all these ratios, right? So it's also high in vitamin D, and vitamin A to vitamin D ratios are super important. And it's a natural occurring, oil in nature. It's not synthetic, it's not derived. It's kind of in its, pure form. And it seems really strange to me that they've really deterred like some women from taking cod liver oil during pregnancy because of this vitamin A concern. And again, synthetic vitamin A is much more of a concern, in my opinion. So there is my caveat with that. So yes, I am taking a little bit of cod liver here and there, lots of fish, like I mentioned before. And let's talk about pregnancy scans now. Well, actually, yeah, I'll talk about scans and then I'll talk about herbs. So you get this like amazing packet. When I say amazing, I'm like, oh. So I started out with a traditional OBGYN, right? When I first got pregnant, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, 8 weeks in and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go see somebody about this. I'm not in Florida. I don't have like my normal community around me. So I scheduled an OBGYN appointment with like a traditional doctor, right? Went in, they got my blood work. And then they like, they do a bunch of other stuff. They give you your schedule, right? There was a lot of scheduled, like, there was a lot of visits you were required to do. So I want to walk through this because my approach, especially with the books I've been reading, is that the less interventions, the better. And I've really been going by this philosophy, the less interventions, the better. So that goes with sonograms, like, ultrasounds. And this goes for like the nuchal translucency scans, etc. So I'm just going to walk you guys through like what I've done so far, and what I've said no to. So there's something called the nuchal translucency scan. And this is everybody's different, right? Like some people may want to do this. Some people don't, and that's totally cool. But for me, I ended up opting out of the nuchal translucency scan. The scan is like an optional ultrasound, and it's performed like usually in the first trimester. It helps determine the baby's risk for congenital conditions like Down syndrome. It's highly accurate, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times when they take your blood work, they're also going to be able to run stuff if you want that option. They're going to be able to run a good amount of panels and be able to tell you, what your risks are, right? So a standard blood test for me was totally fine. And I didn't even really go as far to dig into, all these what ifs, because I feel like it really sets your mind up for, I don't know. For me, it's just better to just go with the flow than to worry about all of these potential what ifs. And even if there's nothing, like either way, I'm good. But I like to say genetics, and again, this is a really common, a common thought now is like genetics, like load the gun, sure, but environment pulls the trigger in a lot of ways. So you can find predispositions, but a lot of what we find, we can also correct. And that's the beautiful part. And that's what a lot of times, like, it doesn't necessarily get taught enough in Western medicine. So for me, just these scans felt a little bit more daunting and a little bit more worrisome than they were encouraging and empowering. So I tended to opt out of scans. So I did not do the nuchal translucency scan. It is, from what I understand, it measures the thickness of your baby's neck. So it basically, I don't know exactly the methodology, but I believe they go in and they like poke around. Like it's a more invasive. Actually, you know what? The nuchal translucency one is not invasive. But they do it, I think, like at the, I don't know. I'm still learning it all, guys. So bear with me. Nuchal translucency is from what I'm reading on my paper, is like technically non-invasive. But it's like really accurate, and somehow it measures the baby of your the thickness of your baby's neck, and it's looking at risk assessments for things like Down syndrome. And then there's the NIPT, free cell or cell-free fetal DNA. That's a blood test. That was what I was offered. And then there's quad testing, or it's called AFP, and that's a blood test, and that can be performed between 15 and 22 weeks. Again, same thing. It's like usually in the second trimester. Then there is invasive testing, the chronic villus sampling. They go in, it's like a transvaginal sampling of placenta tissue. And it's usually done, first trimester of pregnancy. And they go and they pop, they poke and they prod. And again, those tests for me were just like, none of them seemed like they were going to benefit me in any way. I understand there are people that want to know 100% for sure that this is not a thing, right? But for me, that has not been my mentality during this pregnancy. And based on the books I've read, I'm just like, okay, less intervention is better. Like, let my body do its thing. The body doesn't make mistakes. The body knows what it's doing. It can auto-correct, like, and the same goes for the baby's body. Like, me taking the right steps to do, my own routine and following my intuition is going to do world of wonders for, the health of the baby in the long run. So that's my personal, everybody's different though. Everybody is different. So that's super important to remember. So I also said no to, let's see here. What else did I say no to? There was a couple of things I said no to. I definitely said no to getting a booster during pregnancy. That was like one of the first things they asked me. I just felt like there's no reason for me to get that whatsoever at all, let alone, the booster. So for me personally, that was my own decision. My friend and I kind of joked, like, pregnancy is like the time in which you find what is working for you and you stick into a routine, and you don't try a lot of new things. You don't want to do a lot of new things. You don't want to introduce a lot of new X, Y, and Z testing, or, a brand new workout program. Like, pregnancy is when you settle into yourself, you ground into yourself, and you do what works for you, and you keep that routine, and you try to keep that consistency, because it really does a lot for just, like, I don't know. That's been my personal 2 cents, to be honest. Wow. Okay. I forgot about this one. This one's a big one. Glucose test. They will make you take a glucola test. This is around the 26th week of pregnancy. And the glucola test is a sludge of just like toxic grossness, to spike your blood sugar. They want to do a blood sugar test. Now, it is really important that you get your blood sugar checked during like that time in pregnancy, because gestational diabetes is something that you really actually do not want to mess with. It does have its implications. It does have its risks. So it's good to know. But there are other options that you can opt for besides doing this glucola test. Now, I wanted to read about this glucola test. Like, in Europe, it contains something called BVO, which is patented in Europe as a flame retardant, first of all. It contains yellow number 6, which is the sulfonated form of Sudan 1, a level 3 carcinogen, sodium benzoate preservative, and then it's also got like soybean oils, vegetable oils. It's not ideal. And of course, like food coloring, right? Yellow number 6, red 40, these are carcinogens. They've been linked to hyperactivity. They've been linked to cancer. It's, you're drinking an artificial dye, and it doesn't really, I don't know. It doesn't make sense why you couldn't eat like a bunch of fruit or drink like a huge thing of fruit juice and then do your blood glucose. Like, why do we need to drink this like, synthetic glucola sludge from a pharmaceutical company? I'm sure that sells a ton of these, that makes so much money off of the physicians that, make these mothers go through this. And yeah, that's, I get so frustrated when I see that. So I have two options that I know of. You can do a fresh test, which is a test that will, again, it's a blood sugar test. A lot of times physicians are good with this. My midwifery is got that as an option. It's like an additional charge, but whatever, I'll do that. There's another option that you can do your self blood glucose testing. So you're testing every couple of hours for multiple weeks. I think it's 2 weeks, and you can, really see what's happening with your blood sugar there. You have to be with a healthcare provider that is cool with that and that is okay with that, because every provider is different. So those are additional options. I know some of my friends said that they ate a handful of apricots, or they drank a fruit juice. There's different ways that you can, you can spike your blood sugar without taking this horrible, gross drink. So there's that. A couple other things. Let's see. I'm going down my list of things to talk about. This is back to common misconceptions just in general about pregnancy, but lifting. I am still lifting weights. I think there is a misconception in some ways about the activity that pregnant women should be undergoing. And of course, there is a point in which you do not want to be overstressing the body. You do not want to go into preterm labor. There's a lot there, right? Everybody is different. Your tolerance level, your fitness and conditioning level is going to be different. But going into pregnancy, being a little bit more conditioned, I've definitely tried to keep more of my routine. Now, granted, I am certainly not doing what I was doing, which is a very important thing to note. I'm not lifting like I was lifting. But I'm still, I'm still moving around weight. I'm still I'm trying to keep that muscle mass on. I'm doing a ton more Pilates than anything. And I have had in my hips, there's a piece called the pubic symphysis, and it's a part of your hip complex, and it can go into a lot of pain, and you can feel your vagina is bruised. And so lifting in some weeks at the last 2 weeks ago, the last 2 weeks, I had not been able to do much movement, but I'm back and I'm feeling really great and really active. So between yoga and getting some lifting in and mostly Pilates, I've had a really good routine of staying active. And the goal with that, right, is a swift, quick delivery. I would like to have I would like to ease the load of my labor by being really conditioned. And, there's tons of research that, being conditioned and physically active and lifting to a certain extent really dramatically improves this. Now, with that being said, there's always caveats. Everybody's super bio individual. If you are going into your pregnancy and you're not conditioned, you're going to want to approach things a little bit more different. You're going to want to be a little bit more cognizant. You're not going to want to necessarily start a ton of new routines. My best recommendation, because again, what women tend to have struggles with during pregnancy are some of these different diagnoses, right? Gestational diabetes. My biggest recommendation is get walking 4 to 5 miles a day, even anywhere from 3 to 5 miles a day, 10,000 steps. You're going to drastically improve your blood sugar sensitivity, or your insulin sensitivity, I should say, when you are actively walking that amount. So you're reducing your risk of gestational diabetes and some of these other complications by just doing that. So if you're not super, super conditioned, but you're looking to get into a routine and you're feeling pretty good during pregnancy, great. Get some walking shoes on. That's a great place to start. Stair stepper, another great place to start. That's also something that really kicks my butt, especially right now. And I feel my diaphragm just doesn't do what it used to. So that is in regards to lifting. Another thing that I have said no to, and I said no to this before pregnancy, but I'm saying extra no to this now, is airport scanners. When you go through the Lato scanner, to get to your flight, you go through TSA. Personally, I have opted out every single time. I look at the TSA agent that I am unloading my clothes and my bags, etc. with, and I say, hey, I need a female opt-out. Those are the exact words you use. They'll call down, they'll say, hey, female opt-out. That means you won't go through any scanners, and they will do a pat down of you. Now you can do a private screening pat down, or you can just do a pat down in front of everybody. And every single time I have done a pat down in front of everybody, nobody cares. Nobody questions you. I think that's like, I've gotten super used to it. I don't care if people are looking at me as I'm getting like a screen, but that is something that I do. And that's for my own health. And that's also for the health of my fetus. Because I'm already going on an airplane. And there's just, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, this is no different than holding your cell phone. And I beg to differ. I'm not going to get into it, but that's what I do. I opt out of the airport scanners. What else? Books I said yes to. Ooh, I like this one. Birthing from Within. That is a book, again, predominantly on birthing, holistic approach. We love it. Nourishing Traditions, Book of Baby and Childcare. That one is the one. That one's basically my Bible. It's by Thomas S. Cowan. I have like all of his books, and Sally Fallon Morrell. Great book. It really covers everything from pregnancy, newborns, to baby and childcare. And it answers a lot of questions. Husband Coach Childbirth. That's something Rodrigo is reading. It's going to give him a lot of guidance as like a new father, and also as my husband, like what he really needs to step up and do when I'm going through labor, and like ways to empower me, ways to like really support, how to stay calm and not panic. No, knowledge is power, right? So when you understand what's going on in a situation, and you understand, for example, what point in labor your wife is at, there's a lot of relief in having that knowledge, because you know what's happening. It's really important, in my opinion. So those are some books that we have definitely really, gone to town with in terms of diving in deep. And your partner is just as important as you in this process, and making sure that, they're really in with the knowledge and understand, why you're choosing the things you're choosing. For example, like a midwifery as opposed to a hospital. I've had to do some educating with Rodrigo on some of that stuff. And I can also get into that. I said no to conventional hospital birth. I just saw too many things that I didn't align with in the conventional system. And not saying that there's not amazing hospitals, because there absolutely are, that are really empowering women and allowing women to birth their way, because you are in charge of your birth space. Like that is, you have the authority there. So there was a lot of things though in like conventional systems, like for example, you will not tell me not to push. I'm sorry. That's like telling somebody not to throw up. Like that's like a very common thing that like hospitals will do. They'll be like, don't push yet, don't push yet. There's just a lot of cues that are, sometimes they're waiting for the doctor to get there. Sometimes it's just, it's really inconvenient for the mother, if anything, that is going through that process actively. And it can, again, feel very like you feel not empowered whatsoever. So there's that. Also, the birthing on your back that actually literally closes your hips, and it creates a very small opening where the baby can get through. I understand that it also can cause more of a likelihood of tearing. I've heard that that positioning is just very uncomfortable, instead of birthing on like your hands and your knees in more of like a tabletop position, with your knees slightly more bent. So a lot of those things are in the traditional hospital system that I just personally didn't really agree with. Like immediate cord clamping, you'll see that a lot of times. The doctor will clamp the umbilical cord within 30 seconds of the child being born. And there is just too much evidence, in my opinion, that that is not good. at all whatsoever. So I will wait until the cord technically goes gray before I will cord clamp. If you think about the placenta was an organ that was attached to the fetus. That fetus was getting its oxygen supply from the placenta. That is like how it was working, right? Like it's a very, very important organ throughout the baby's entire life. And you're telling me that within 30 seconds of the baby coming out, you're going to clamp that? No. That doesn't make sense. There's too much nutrients that are also like passed on to the fetus during those last 30 minutes to an hour that the placenta is attached as that infant is making its transition from womb into the world. They clamp the cord to prevent the fetus from getting too much blood, which is actually crazy. They do it again. Yeah, they just want the fetus to not get too much blood. But there's a lot of evidence suggests that the fetus actually needs all of that blood. And it actually serves a purpose. So that is my 2 cents. I'm delaying the cord clamping, absolutely, without a doubt. Too much. And again, you'll read these books and you'll understand why they say what they say, what the studies indicate, right? And I think that that's really important. So no to immediate cord clamping. I want to have skin-on-skin contact with my baby absolutely immediately. Typically, the hospital will take the baby away. They'll clean the vernix off, or the white stuff off the baby, which also serves as a protective mechanism for the baby right after it gets born. So you want to leave that on a little bit longer, and you want to have skin-on-skin contact with the baby. That's really important right out of the womb. We just have too many interventions that prevent some of these things from happening. And I understand in the Western space that all of these different interventions serve purposes in this, but when you dig into it, the traditional way, in my opinion, and from what I read, it is the way that it was meant to be. So some of those interventions don't always make sense, in my opinion. Antibiotic ointment is another thing that they'll do a lot of times to the babies. I'm not sure I'm going to do that either. I'd rather not smear antibiotics on my baby as soon as it's born. What else? No, I don't want to be induced. Ideally, again, this is my ideal labor and delivery, right? There are going to be complications. I'm not saying that there will be complications, but there's always a chance that something happens that doesn't go according to your plan. And guess what? You can't play God. You can't be the hero all the time. Sometimes you need those Western medical interventions. They serve an absolute purpose. And we love that we have both options. But I will try to go into the 42nd week if necessary. If I haven't gone into labor before then, I do want to try to carry the baby to term. I don't want to be induced. I'm really trying not to be induced. I don't want to get an epidural. Luckily, the midwife center doesn't even have epidurals on site. So a lot of times what happens with midwiferys is mothers go into labor kind of unprepared for how long their personal labor is going to be. And a lot of times they end up getting transferred to hospitals because of exhaustion. That's usually it's labor exhaustion. And sometimes they need the epidural. And I'm not going to say that that's not going to be me, because I don't know. I've never done this before. That would be really egotistical of me to say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try not to, but I'm also not going to try to be this absolute hero and not admit when I truly do need help. But it has been very much so a mindset thing. I've been doing a lot of breath work. I've been practicing super cold showers for 5 minutes. You want to try to breathe through a really cold shower. That can help you prepare for breathing through labor. And I don't know, guys, I feel your body kind of tends to take over, especially when you're in a calm, dimly lit empowering space that feels really homey, that you can play your music, that you can play worship music, that you can embrace that this is like a really sacred time. It feels very different than when hospital, lights are beaming on you and you've got nurses telling you not to push and, you're not in charge of your own labor. I think there's a lot to be said for some of those, small changes that can end up really providing a more pain-free birth. So that's my 2 cents. The other thing that I wanted to mention about why we see a lot of times, like why we will see so many interventions in the space, like especially in like Western healthcare. And I saw this study and it was really interesting. It was like OBGYNs see less natural births than midwives and like doulas, because OBGYNs typically have to call for an intervention based on like the standard procedure of things before they actually will like necessarily see a vaginal unmedicated birth. So midwives and doulas have seen much crazier things sometimes, where sometimes they'll see breached births. Sometimes they're doing like crazy unmedicated births. They'll see the fetal ejection reflex, which is when the fetus just comes out in one push. It's usually when the mother feels this like surge of, I'm assuming it's like the surge of hormones and everything just kind of all at once, and the baby comes out in one push. My mom had that with my brother. And it's kind of like a phenomenon, but more women tend to do it when they're in a more like in a safer space than the hospital settings. And there's a lot of, like I said, interventions that happen and take place. So I wanted to read this thing. Step by step, one intervention leads to a series of interventions in the Western healthcare system. And the net result is the mother finally ends up with a cesarean. And everybody says, thank God we were able to do all those interventions to save your baby. The fact of the matter is that they didn't start the cascade of interventions to begin with. None of that would have been necessary. So you go to the hospital. In the hospital, you're not allowed to have a very long labor. So if you're not dilating rapidly, which you're likely not to do if you get an epidural, for example, early in labor, you will be given Pitocin. Well, put the Pitocin in the IV, will flow into the veins. The Pitocin makes contractions longer and stronger and closer together. So then the pain of labor is much worse. So you go in with that for a while because you've had the Pitocin, but then eventually the pain of the contractions is overwhelming. The epidural, you need to up the epidural amount, and then labor slows down more because of that. So then you need more Pitocin, and now you're not feeling the pain of the extra Pitocin. You've gotten the epidural, but your baby is getting compressed, and the blood and oxygen supply is essentially dwindling, and so the flow to the baby is compromised, basically what happens. And then the baby is likely to go into distress, and then you're sent off for an emergency C-section from the baby being in distress. So this describes, and again, I just think that that's such a good, it's like a little video that I just read. It's such a good explanation as to why we see so many interventions, is because it all started with interventions. It started with the early onset epidural. It started, and then it went to the Pitocin, and then back to more epidural, and then more Pitocin, and then now the baby's in distress. And all of a sudden you're in an emergency C-section you had zero plans for. And again, to begin with, Western hospitals, you're not supposed to have a long, like, a super long labor anyway. So that is a lot. And I really hope I didn't overwhelm anybody with all of the stuff that I've been trying to learn. And I feel like this is really just more of a word vomit for me. I'm still like undecided on circumcision. Actually, that's another one. I really don't want to do the vitamin K shot right when when the baby is born. And I have like a couple of reasons why here actually listed. So the vitamin K in the shot is a synthetic version of vitamin K to start, right? It's called phytonadione. Ooh, I did not say that right. Whatever. phytonadione. Phytonadione. I don't know, guys. You'll have to look it up. And it is technically a large dose of a synthetic vitamin in the first moments of life. And the reality is that can cause imbalances, because the hope is that your baby is pretty balanced when it's born. It's got a healthy gut flora. It's got, all of these natural mechanisms of preservation that it's been born with. And we just come in and we, again, with our interventions, we love to come in and do our thing. So studies have linked super large doses of vitamin K with childhood cancers and leukemia. By some estimates, the chance of your child developing leukemia from the vitamin K shot is about 1 in 500, or twice as great as the risk of bleeding on the brain. Now, to back up for a second, the reason why they give a vitamin K shot to begin with is to support the newborn's clotting capabilities in order to prevent the very rare problem of slow bleeding into the brain in the weeks after birth, right? This is a very, very rare occurrence that this happens. And it's also supposed to prevent and safeguard your baby if you're involved in a car accident on the way home from the hospital, which I also just think is just a really interesting, weird foresight. I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot. So the other ingredients in the vitamin K shot include phenol, which is carbolic acid, a poisonous substance derived from coal tar, benzyl alcohol, which is just a preservative, propylene glycol, better known as antifreeze, acetic acid, astringent, antimicrobial agent, hydrochloric acid, lecithin from soybean oil, and castor oil. So I'm not sold on the vitamin K shot. And I believe the vitamin K shot is actually I think it's required for circumcision, from what I understand. So if you have a boy, your baby sometimes is required, unless you find a general practitioner who won't. It is required. Of course, the baby's breast protection is mom's vitamin K rich diet. Leafy greens from vitamin K, cheese, liver, eggs, yolks, grass-fed meat for vitamin K2, lacto-fermented foods so that your intestinal and vaginal tracts are populated with good vitamin K producing bacteria, getting it from nature versus synthetics. That is really my protocol. And that's really what I want to try to stick with. Who knows? I'll keep you guys posted. I also wanted to do a home birth, but the way that things panned out and what was available in my area care-wise, it ended up aligning that I was better off going to a midwifery that had a ton of different amazing pieces of equipment that I could use during a birthing tub and all these different balls and all this stuff, right? So what you want is sometimes different from what you get, and that's totally cool. Let's see, anything else? There is something that they'll do for the mother towards the end of pregnancy. I think it's the Group B strep test. They'll test to see if you have this strain of strep. And if you do, sometimes they'll put you on an antibiotic, which is just, again, not great. There seems to be little to no risk for the baby during delivery, for this particular strain of strep, but it seems like it got blown out of proportion, and then they end up putting the mother on antibiotics. There's no reason during pregnancy it should be a problem, and there's no reason really during birth that it will be a problem either. So again, another intervention to just think about. A lot of times Western medicine will induce you. If you're getting to that 38, 39 week mark, sometimes they'll look to do that. You can go up. Europeans, for example, consider 42 weeks to be a normal a gestational period of time. In biblical times, gestation was 10 lunar months, which is, again, the upper limit of the gestational period in like our culture. And a lot of times you won't even see doctors willing to go that far. And what else? I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. Super important. Traditional methods to speed up childbirth. I really liked this section. This is stuff I will do. Herbs. You can do an ease birth flower essence, which combines thyme, citrine, clear quartz gem essence, silver leaf, squash essence, strelitzia essence, and wild garlic. It's designed to ease birth pains and speed delivery. Homeopathy, again, some people love it, some people hate it, some people don't really know what it is. Do your own research. There's lots of interventions like that. Acupressure, my friend literally went for a foot reflexology massage and that night ended up going into labor. Reflexology and acupressure is incredibly helpful as you're getting into those final weeks of pregnancy, because it's an easy, effective way to help open up the cervix versus like from a reflexology point. So don't do it too early in pregnancy is the one caveat that they said. And then you can also go to acupuncture. Acupuncture is super common in China to get labor going or hasten it along. So if you're approaching or surpassing your 42 weeks, by all means, try to get acupuncture to get labor to speed up. I've heard some women will take a shot of castor oil. Absolutely, you cannot. I don't know. Personally, I do not want to do that. You have to try to keep it down. It makes you want to vomit, which I personally just don't want to have to do. So I know that's another way. And yeah, guys, that was a lot. I covered a lot of stuff. I'm sure I'll learn more and more. I'm going to be going for like pregnancy and childbirth classes that are required by the midwifery. I have to go a couple of times. I have to go for like 2 weekends or something like that. Or I can do like a couple of like weeknights. My midwifery is a little bit far away because we had a couple of midwiferys closed down in St. Pete. We had 1 or 2 that closed down or relocated or something. So I'm gonna have to drive a little bit when I'm in labor, but that's okay. I'm gonna have Rodrigo, I'm gonna have my mom, I'm gonna have my dad. Everybody's gonna be down in Florida. So I don't know. Oh, last thing I want to cover before leaving this podcast is herbs. Now, herbs are something that, again, can be a little bit fear-mongery, but also need to be taken with extreme caution as well, because there's not enough research, because they don't put money into researching herbs, because they're not patentable. They occur in nature and, they get the short end of the stick a lot of times. So herbs are super great when you're trying to conceive sometimes, but then you want to be really careful once you actually get pregnant what herbs you're taking. Essential oils and volatile oils you'll really want to avoid. Thuya, I can't even say it. Oregano, sage, tansy, thyme, and peppermint. Those are some that are not necessarily super recommended during pregnancy. Take this with a grain of salt, though, because they give women all sorts of stuff during pregnancy in the Western conventional system, like antibiotics not necessarily antibiotics, but again, the glucola test, different interventions and treatments and things that they have, some pregnant women take that I would much rather be doing herbs than some of those things. And the reality is that herbs are just not as researched. Abortifacient is the big term that you'll hear. This is typically, there are some herbs that can cause contractions, like in early contractions in early pregnancy. This, I feel like, becomes maybe a little bit less of an issue as you progress in pregnancy, but you still don't want to be having contractions at like 30 weeks pregnant and be super early and be like, what the heck is going on, right? So abortifacients include tansy, safflower, rue, mugwort, yarrow, thuya, Scotch broom, angelica, wormwood, pennyroyal, and there's a couple other like stimulating laxatives. For example, you don't really want to do castor oil. Aloe, if you're ingesting it, can be rhubarb, buckthorn. Some of those can be laxatives, and I don't know if I guess those interfere sometimes. And then phytoestrogens are like red clover and hops. Most of the time, people are not really super into the herbs besides some of the more basic herbs. The big one that I would say that you might want to stay away from a little bit more would be like oregano. That one is just a very potent herb. Oregano oil is even more potent, so I definitely stay away from that. There's a lot of contraindications there. But I do still occasionally take this little bitter tincture of bitters that don't really raise any red flags to me, and I felt fine taking. That helps my like liver and helps me digest foods and stuff that I've had no problem with. I've had like some mushroom elixirs that I've had no problem with personally. And I was talking with one of my friends who's a TCM practitioner, and he was like, I personally like sometimes prescribe, like have some of my patients on certain herbs that I think they'll do well with during pregnancy that there seems to be zero risk with. And I feel like there's just a lot more fear mongering when it comes to the herbs because of the literature that's currently out. But you think about this, these have been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And, I would rather opt for those sometimes than some of the Western approaches. So that is it, guys. That is the do's, the yeses, and the no's so far for me during pregnancy. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a long one. I feel like I just rambled for like almost an hour, but I hope you found value in this, and DM me if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your day, night, wherever you are in the world. Bye.